into these discoveries.
Chile has always dominated global copper production, but in recent decades, the U.S. has lost ground to China, Peru, and the Congo, dropping from second globally.
Our ability to bring on new supply is critical, and our ability to keep the smelters we do have full is
buy
really
Rio
a
Tinto
national
stock,
security
basically.
issue.
The U.S. has more than 275 million metric tons in reserves and resources, comparable to Canada and Australia combined. Yet only 3 mines have come into production since 2002. Regulation and legal challenges have meant, on average, a new U.S. mine takes nearly 29 years to go from discovery to production. That's 6 years slower than the global average.
So it's really important that because this takes time, we need to start
It has
now.
nothing to do
And
with
again,
regulations
every day
at all.
that we delay Resolution Copper is another day that we continue to depend
Well, at
on
least not
foreign sources
anymore.
of copper. We have the resources here, and I think United States can really take control of their own destiny as far as copper production and close that
That's right.
deficit that has existed for decades.
It's taken more than a dozen years for resolution to
Well, the
do much more
$19
than
trillion
drill a mine shaft.
that's pouring into our country from various
In late
different other
March,
countries,
the very day we filmed
$1
there,
trillion
the project finally got
fraud
the go-ahead.
that Doge
This
and
is a
Elon Musk
region where
has
there is
uncovered,
double-digit unemployment,
and then all the
and the
money
jobs
that's
are
pouring in
meaningful.
from the
economic development is meaningful.
tariffs
$1 billion a year
already
into Arizona's
balances the
economy
budget.
is a really big deal.
So this already
The
just
competition
adds
is not only
to it.
over who
Oh, let's
has
not even talk
copper
about all
in
the
the ground.
oil we got now.
It is over who can process
From
it, move
Venezuela.
it, and turn it into usable metal
And with the
fastest.
straight
China
shutdown,
dominates
guess who
that
they're
process,
buying their oil
importing about
from?
60% of global copper ore and concentrate, and producing more than
Need I say more?
45% of the world's refined copper, about 14 million metric tons in 2025, compared to 850,000 in the U.S.
So the copper smelters, they've gone
Yeah,
from
that, of course,
16 operating ones back in
supposedly
the
there's
1980s
technologies
to
that don't even
now
need
just
copper
2 operating assets in
that generate
2026.
clean, free energy.
Some of them have closed because of environmental issues.
supposed to
Some
do
of them
some
have
sort of
closed because
press release
of
at some
difficult
point on the,
economic situations.
UFO thing.
So now
Anyways,
we're down to 2 processing
quiet so y'all can
facilities,
listen.
and actually the U.S. exports concentrate to other countries like Canada, South Korea, Mexico to get that mining product processed. So about 57% of the refined
Do you mean
copper is
import?
imported from other countries
Yeah,
for
we
the
understood what
US's
you meant,
domestic
though.
use. So there's a clear reliance on imports. Demand is growing by about 40%
There
for
you go,
the
you
US
corrected yourself.
between now and 2040. And that demand is going to be driven by data centers. It's going to be driven by energy transmission and distribution. It's going to be driven by clean
But what about
technologies.
climate change?
And so some of those aspects become almost a national security issue.
When you talk about critical minerals,
Almost.
and
It's not
what we
almost,
produce
it
here in the
is.
United States, I think the mining industry gets forgotten about a little bit. I don't know if it's really underappreciated. I think it's just not really known to the general public. We take a lot
You're
of
being
that stuff for
diplomatic,
granted.
sir.
When you flip a light switch, the power just
It's
comes
been
on.
over-regulated.
Nate Foster is the managing director of Rio Tinto Kennecott, one of only 2 facilities in the United States that is home to the entire copper supply chain.
From here, it goes through a crusher, goes on about a 5-mile conveyor belt to a concentrator. What a copper concentrator does is it takes that blasted rock, crushes it, pulverizes it, and then we actually float copper, believe it or not. And so the concentrator makes about a 25% pure copper concentrate. From there, it's shipped to the north of us to our smelter and refining, where it goes from a 25% copper concentrate through a series of refining furnaces.
Fired by natural gas, they refine the ore into what are called cathodes, 99.9% pure copper.
It's an absolutely fascinating, highly technical business. Kennecott, about 20% of all of this nation's refined cathode comes from our operation.
Other companies are working on different ways to fill the copper gap.
These are printed circuit boards.
One promising strategy, recycling scrap into domestic supply.
You can see.
Now that's a
The
realistic
German
way
copper
to
company
help
Arubis
the
opened a recycling smelter in Augusta, Georgia last
environment.
year. It is already expanding.
The US produces around 2 million metric tons of copper-containing scrap annually, and it's very fragmented. It's across the country, and most of it is still landfilled and exported. Most of it's exported actually to China. So that's why also the local recycling companies and the scrap dealers, they welcome us coming here because they don't have to export it to other countries. They can keep it in the country. So it comes from mostly medium and large recycling companies. There's different types of recycling material. There's on the one hand, there's the basic copper scrap, then there's copper cables, but then there's also more complex recycling materials like circuit boards, which contain copper, but also other metals like gold, silver, nickel, tin, and so on, which are also attractive.
And how much can you produce?
Well, we just finished phase 1 here in our enrichment site. There we consume 90,000 tons of recycled material and we produce 35,000 tons of blister copper. Now in summer we will finish phase 2, which is doubling the capacity. So when phase 2 is finished, we will have an output capacity of around 70,000 tons of blister copper.
We are aiming for about 180,000 tons of input material here for this facility, and we're also planning to produce roughly 180,000 tons of product, so we're very close to zero waste, converting everything into other materials.
David Schulteis is Aruba's Richmond's president.
Back there at the end, you can see higher grade copper material. You can see the typish reddish color that comes with copper. For a layman looking at these materials, it's sometimes difficult to understand, is there even metal inside? I can guarantee you there's plenty of metal inside. This is really the material that we're looking for. And that's where the complexity is. Our main value contribution is to melt down the materials that we have, build the phases, separate the materials, and bring the variety of metals back into the industrial life cycle.
Scrap is just a portion of the story, so it's quite marginal, quite incremental. It won't close that gap that the U.S. needs to close. It needs to close about 1 million tons of refined copper. And scrap is just incremental gains.
Usually, markets are the key. The copper supply gap has prices for the metal near all-time highs, and that has more mines, smelters, and recycling plants on the drawing board. National security may drive regulatory relief, but for now, time remains the biggest obstacle. Copper may not get the attention of rare earths, but for the coming American economy, it's perhaps even more important.
When you look at these hyperscale data centers that are really around AI, they can consume as much as 50,000 tons of copper in one facility. 50,000 tons, right? So put that in perspective of
That's a misrepresentation. National security is not driving regulatory relief. Our new president is. Although it does help, but that's not the main thing. That's not accurate.
So why is it important for
investors
to pay attention to all
Keep it real.
Copper is the metal of electrification. It is what really fuels the economy. You've probably used copper maybe a dozen times so far, by the time that you wake up. It is critically important, and the fact that it is needed so much in our daily lives is something everybody should be paying attention to.
Up next, it's tax time in the U.S., and the government sure needs the money. Can it get more by taxing the rich? And should it?
I would disagree with that. Last time I checked, the budget's practically balanced in accrual counting, thanks to you-know-who. Golly, these guys.
take? What were some of the questions that you've been asked?
Well, I guess the most fun and most asked questions was how much have I spent on training my open claw.
Let us know the next time you host these open claw workshops.
Yvonne's ready. Yvonne's ready.
You have to do it on TV. Well,
This looks so cute on you. It's like a little beret.
Don't miss the China Show live every weekday.
Bringing you the world's business and financial news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Michael McKee at Mount Everest. And this is Bloomberg.
Have you ever thought about, or would you make a movie for a streaming service? Would you make a Netflix movie?
That's a great question.
I mean, I'm waiting for one where I ask and you go, that was a shitty question.
Yeah. I mean, you're good at your job, bro. Like, it's actually the first time anybody's ever asked me that. I'm not here to say what I would and wouldn't do in the future. But the theatrical experience is one that means a great deal to me. It means a great deal to us. I feel a certain responsibility. Like if Fruitville had happened a calendar year later, it probably would have come out on streaming. I've been fortunate enough that everything that I've written and directed has been a theatrical release. So I feel a duty to try to protect that. But that's where I'm at today.
Welcome to the world of decentralized finance. Bloomberg is covering all things crypto, the people, the transactions, and the technology. Bloomberg Crypto, Tuesdays only on Bloomberg.
This is a story about what we pay for civilized society. That's how Oliver Wendell Holmes described taxes, something we all pretty much recognize we need, but that none of us enjoys paying. And so we end up in an endless back and forth about whether we're paying enough, whether we're paying too much, and whether everyone is paying their fair share.
A subject that's very close to my heart and close to your wallets, that old jalopy of our tax system.
Some say my tax plan is too big. Others say it's too small.
Send me these tax reforms and I will sign them right away.
In this act, we have officially made the Trump tax cuts permanent.
The debate's been raging since the time of the Gilded Age over 100 years ago, when a constitutional amendment was needed to have any U.S. federal income tax at all.
The introduction of the income tax in this country and its sort of history, which I've been interested in of recent, you can kind of trace its roots back to concerns about inequality and the first Gilded Age. Concerns that there was wealth that was being concentrated in these American oligarchs.
Natasha Sarin is a law professor at Yale, where she co-founded the Budget Lab.
It was exactly in response to the needs of the FISC to finance itself and concerns about inequality and its rapid growth in society.
From the outset, the federal income tax was designed to do two things: make sure the government had the money it needed, and address extreme inequality in income and wealth. Flash forward to today, and the federal government certainly does not collect nearly the amount that it seeks to spend each year. The Congressional Budget Office now projects federal deficits growing from $1.9 trillion this fiscal year to $3.1 trillion in 2036.
So we have a terrible fiscal situation.
Yeah, you can thank our leaders for that. But Trump is solving that problem.
And philanthropic funds of Bloomberg founder and majority shareholder Michael Bloomberg.
The only way we're really going to solve it is partly by raising revenue. We're not going to cut spending. There's no political appetite.
Oh, we're talking about the guy who
I don't
spent
even think it would be economically or socially.
I think almost $1 billion.
So yeah, taxes have to go up.
On Orange Man Bad.
Is the question of who should pay the taxes.
Bro,
and is the current system
you need
fair?
to sit down and humble yourself.
What you see going on, including in this California referendum that they're trying to get through, is a deep perception, which I share, in this country that the tax system is not fair, that the wealthy are simply not paying their share. One simple example is capital gains taxes. The current capital gains tax rate is 23.8%, as I'm sure you well know. From the late 60s till the late 90s, the capital gains rate was somewhere between 28 and 35%. And yet, so it's lower now than it was then. I'm not sure what the argument for that is, given that government is being asked to do more and more. The problem that the California referendum has pointed at, which is a tough one to solve, is the problem of unrealized capital gains. That you have people like Elon Musk, Mark Zuckerberg, Jeff Bezos, pick your near trillionaire,
Charging less in taxes for income off of capital gains, as opposed to income off of labor, is based, at least in part, on the idea that it's not fair to tax income twice.
Income that accrues to sort of owners of stakes in corporations, let's say, is taxed at two levels. It's taxed when the corporate tax rate is coming in and taxing the corporate revenues that have accumulated to a company, and it's taxed when those dollars are paid out, for example, in the form of dividends to shareholders.
But it's one thing to say we shouldn't be taxed twice on our income. It's another to say we should never be taxed on some gains at all.
There has been a dramatic uptick in the share of that type of capital income that's really never taxed by the tax system at all, because it's held by individuals and then passed down to their heirs, such that when it is passed down, any tax liability that accumulated in your or I's lifetime is actually erased from the perspective of the tax system. And that potential for erasure, if you look at the top 1% of distribution, about 40% of their wealth. So a very significant amount of what Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos has in terms of what makes them have these staggering amounts, hundreds of billions of dollars, trillions of dollars in wealth, is exactly in those unrealized assets.
That way around ever paying taxes on gains on investments is called stepped-up basis, where the value of an asset is deemed to be what it's worth when inherited, even if it's gained enormously in value while being held by the one passing it down to the heirs. Which means that trillions of dollars worth of assets may forever be outside the reach of Uncle Sam. And what's more, the wealthy owner of the investment can enjoy the benefits without selling and paying taxes by simply borrowing against the asset and pledging it as collateral.
If we take people at the top, what they have the capacity to do that regular people, frankly, don't have the capacity to do is say, instead of consuming based on my wages or something, I'm going to have a loan from a bank, let's say, and as collateral for that loan, I will hand them my stake in my business. And then they'll hand me some money, and I will consume out of what I've borrowed from the bank. The fisc never hits, the tax system never hits this activity in any way. So essentially, I am being able to consume out of pre-tax income, and that advantages me relative to someone who's not being able to get access to those same loans to be able to finance their consumption.
There's no real doubt that the current tax system can benefit the very wealthy. But some say this is the wrong focus. It's not whether some people end up with much, much more than others. What matters is how they got there.
Do you think that the most wealthy in the American society pay their fair share of taxes?
I think that anytime you're thinking about whether anybody's paying a fair share or redistributing anything in accordance with fairness, it's a mistake to think that we would know the answer to that question by looking at the end output, by looking at the total result at the end of how it was distributed.
Jessica Flanagan is professor of leadership studies at the University of Richmond.
And if they're investing it or how they're using it, whether it's a fair outcome for them to be taxed or not. And so when people say, oh, this person's not paying their fair share, I think a lot of times they think that there's some end state of fairness where we'll know, oh, this is the correct distribution.
What's more, Professor Flanagan takes issue with the idea of changing the tax system to deter the investments the very wealthy are making.
If you care about the well-being of everybody in society, but especially the worst off, isn't how the pie is distributed, but how much pie there is, how big the pie is. And so in some cases, if you're very progressive in your tax system, a highly regulated economy, we see that that's to shrink the size of the pie, and that's meaning there's less up for distribution for everybody in the society, and everybody's missing out on the benefits from economic growth. And so I think we should be wary about increasing the progressivity of taxation for that reason, because you really don't want to mess with economic growth. That money is already doing work for the public good by being invested in the market. And so taking that money out and putting it into the government, I think would be, in a lot of cases, a much less efficient allocation of resources, because let's just think about what the government is spending the money on. A very inefficient healthcare system, a basic income for older people.
Yeah, so and all the fraud, like $1 trillion of it that Doge uncovered.
Problems, it wouldn't. There's just
which
not
a
enough.
material portion of it was being used to finance political campaigns of the Democrats.
Some of the national deficit and
Why don't you
debt,
talk about
and not
that,
take away
Miss?
the incentives for hard work and innovation.
Or you usually just omit highly material facts in your
There are 3 or 4
presentation like an
things that I would do
unscrupulous
if I could wave my
charlatan?
magic wand. I would raise the capital gains rate, maybe not all the way to the 37% of ordinary income, because there have been studies that suggest if you raise it too much, you actually lose revenue, because people don't sell things because they don't want to pay the taxes.
That's not true, man. It's called tax elasticity of demand.
Pass this stuff on and pay their estate taxes.
You raise
but
the
not pay any
taxes.
capital gains taxes.
People do
on
what's
what
called
was made.
corporate
I would,
inversions.
make the interest used to,
For
to
example,
borrow against stock like that not deductible. I would eliminate the carried interest special tax loophole.
Ireland has a 10% corporate tax rate.
That the rich get away with stuff.
All they have to do
and some
is move their money out of the country,
proposals with my
and then we get nothing.
That don't engage
Nada,
with
zero.
some of the more novel tools like wealth taxes.
You're not talking about that.
Or
you're a bunch of liars.
Market taxation of
You're a bunch
capital
of
gains.
unscrupulous
But instead
charlatans,
say, if
pieces
you
of
do
shit,
the more
basically.
sort of traditional ideas that have been in this space.
You can't raise the
things
taxes
like
even if you wanted to.
eliminating the preference for capital income.
You know how much money
that is
left our
passed to
country during the
heirs
last
by
administration?
getting
It's
rid
all
of
coming
stepped-up
back.
basis and doing
Shut up.
legalization at death and increasing capital gains rates slightly. You are able to raise something like $400 billion over the course of the next decade. And I think there is deep logic to that. In some sense, I think the idea that we should be thinking about tax tools that allow us to tax, people often say, or I often say, that we should have a tax system that taxes Paris Hilton, not Conrad Hilton. You know, so thinking about tools for like inheritance taxes that can be relatively simply administered and levied to be able to do better about encouraging not just the taxation of capital income at the top, but also the transfer during one's lifetime of capital to its most productive use.
Whatever the better system might be for taxation, it comes back to that basic question of what we pay for a civilized society and what makes it civilized. Is it that people are roughly equal? Or is the real challenge making sure that the least fortunate have enough?
As a society, would we be better off with less inequality? All other things being equal, recognizing all things are never equal. But that, in that sense, is that a cost for our society?
Inequality is important, but that's not the big problem today.
There's a philosopher
Why are we talking about it?
who recently died, Harry Frankfurt, and he talks about something called the doctrine of sufficiency. And when he's talking about the doctrine of sufficiency,
Yeah, what about the genocide that happened in Iran?
To a distribution and to say,
Aren't you not talking about, you want to talk about inequality?
And to think that there's a kind of problem.
Why don't you talk about that?
But most people, when they're looking at inequality, they think there's a moral problem there. The real thing that they're tracking is that some people don't have enough. And if we focused on making sure that everyone who doesn't have enough has enough, then the sufficientarians and the egalitarians will walk that path together for a long time.
That does it for us here at Wall Street Week. I'm David Weston. See you next week for more stories of capitalism.
In case you missed it on the close.
Sunday, April 19, 2026.
I'm 54 years old. I've always been into technology. I always invest in things that I first believe in. And,
A prominent physicist has put forward a striking proposal. Our universe may not be limited to the 4 dimensions of space and time we experience every day. Instead, it could operate with 7 dimensions in total, with 3 compact extra layers folded so tightly they remain invisible. This idea emerges not from science fiction, but from an attempt to resolve one of modern physics' most enduring puzzles, the black hole information paradox first highlighted by Stephen Hawking in the 1970s. Richard Pinkak, a senior researcher at the Slovak Academy of Sciences Institute of Experimental Physics, leads the team behind the new model. The work, published in the journal General Relativity and Gravitation, explores how extra dimensions arranged in a specific geometric structure could prevent black holes from fully evaporating. The 4 dimensions we know, 3 of space and 1 of time, form the basis of everyday experience and Einstein's general relativity. But Pinchak's framework adds 3 more. We experience 3 dimensions of space and 1 of time, 4 dimensions in total, Pinchak explained. Our model proposes that the universe actually has 7 dimensions, the 4 we know, plus 3 tiny extra dimensions curled up so tightly that we cannot directly perceive them. These hidden dimensions take the form of highly symmetrical G manifolds.
I believe that.
In this geometry, a property called torsion creates a twisting effect in spacetime. At the extremely small scales reached
I thought it was
as a
called
black hole
time
shrinks
dilation.
through Hawking radiation, this torsion generates a repulsive force. The proposal directly confronts the information paradox. Hawking showed that black holes emit radiation and slowly lose mass, eventually evaporating completely. Yet quantum mechanics insists that information cannot be destroyed, only scrambled.
That's the
Imagine you throw
theory.
a book into a fire, Pinchak said. The book is destroyed, but in principle you could reconstruct every word from the smoke, ash, and heat. The information is scrambled, not lost. In a completely evaporating black hole, however, the information about everything that fell inside appears to vanish forever, creating a fundamental conflict between general relativity and quantum theory. Pinchak's 7-dimensional model offers an escape. As the black hole approaches its final stages, the torsion-induced repulsive force acts like a brake. This repulsive force acts as a brake, halting the evaporation before the black hole vanishes completely, Pinchak noted. What remains is a stable microscopic remnant, roughly 10 billion times smaller than an electron in mass. This remnant can encode the lost information through subtle oscillations known as quasi-normal modes. The same geometric structure also connects to particle physics. The torsion field in the
April Hong in Singapore, your top stories this hour.
Sherry on.
Tosca, motor vessel Tosca, vacate your engine room. Vacate your engine room. We're prepared to subject you to disabling fire.
Translate it. Fuck around and find out.
Oil jumping at the Asia Open as the U.S. Navy attacks and seizes an Iranian-flagged cargo ship in the Gulf
Let's
of
see if the
Oman.
gap is filled
Stock futures
here
turning lower
on
as traders assess a
AUD-JPY.
chaotic weekend in the conflict. President Trump again
Almost.
threatening to destroy Iranian power plants and bridges if negotiations fail, with Tehran casting doubt on a second round of peace talks. And the UAE reportedly seeking a U.S. financial backstop in case the Iran war inflicts major damage on the energy-rich Gulf state.
It's been another dramatic weekend with really the optimism from last week with the S&P 500 rallying to a record high, not lasting after the Iranian ship news came out that it was seized by the U.S. Navy, not to mention, of course, the mixed messaging that we're getting when it comes to the course of this war. So early in the Asian session already, we have some upside for the U.S. dollar and risk-sensitive currencies like the Aussie dollar leading the decline. So it's a pretty shaky setup for the Asian session. We're seeing
but we're not concerned.
To the downside with more than 1%
That's a little bit knee-jerk reaction from the algos.
On Friday, we have some more weakness on the Japanese yen as well. A lot to do with what markets are gauging from commentary coming from the Bank of Japan Governor Ueda, who did not give a clear signal of where rates could go.
Aren't we supposed to have strength in the yen? You know, risk off.
We do have a couple
Guess
of
it's not that big of a deal.
Also from central banks of the Philippines, Indonesia as well. No change expected from them, given, of course, the caution as the Iran war continues into its 7th week. When it comes to the bond space, it'll be crucial to watch Tuesday's Senate confirmation hearing of Kevin Warsh as Fed chair, as we continue to hear Fed speak about where the war could go and what that could mean for the economy. Take a listen.
Abstracting from the effects of tariffs and energy, I see a forecast in which underlying inflation continues to move toward 2%, leaving me cautious about rate cuts now, and are more inclined to cuts later in the year to support the labor market when the outlook is more steady.
Of course, Sherry, this is coming at a time where Iran's reversal on allowing transit through the strait alongside the ongoing U.S. blockade. These latest developments effectively leave the waterway shut. And Brent is reacting this morning. We're popping back towards the 96 handle. And don't forget, we were roughly 90 on Friday amid these hopes that there would be an end to the war or a full reopening of the strait or the potential, the prospects of that. We're also seeing WTI surging. Note as well how Brent's premium over WTI remains high, and this is at higher levels than pre-war, certainly. We are also seeing gas prices reacting to the latest development, though note at this time of trading, volumes are thin. We are also watching out for how treasuries react today, especially given how the energy prices seem to be setting the tone for U.S. treasuries and debt overall. Let's get the latest on the escalation of the Iran conflict with Bloomberg politics editor Laura Davison. Laura, how did things unravel in such a manner, and are we back to square one?
It really does feel like Groundhog Day, and we're in a situation we have found ourselves many times. We're up against a deadline, this time the ceasefire set to expire on Wednesday morning in Asia, and tensions are really at almost an all-time high here in this war.
I disagree.
Trump come out on Friday and say that
it's not Groundhog Day. We can't take out their entire military twice.
It became clear that none of that actually came to materialize, and in fact, these peace talks that Trump is talking about taking place in Islamabad, Iran is not even sure that they're going to send a delegation to them. So, lots of different pieces here of the Strait of Hormuz. We have a situation where you essentially have both Iran and the U.S. sort of wrestling control, saying, no, I'm blocking it. No, I'm blocking the Strait. So this continues
there's no struggle. We control it 100%. Come on, give me a break.
UK-linked ship as well as the U.S. seizing an Iranian cargo ship that was transiting through the Strait, blowing out their engine room and boarding that ship as well.
Yeah, it's called fuck around and find out.
Of confusion, a lot of sort of escalation, and potentially a breakage of the ceasefire, depending how both sides see it.
Laura, you
how
just
both
read
sides
my
see
mind
it.
Calling this Groundhog Day. That's exactly what I told my producers earlier today, because it seems we're just talking about the same points in the last 7 weeks of the war. Mixed messaging.
It's supposed to be an analytical show, not a comedy.
How the negotiations are proceeding. One thing that caught my eye, though, reports from the Wall Street Journal that the UAE might be asking for a currency swap line. How significant is this, given that it seems these Gulf states are expecting perhaps more deterioration?
Right, we're going to help out the UAE. They're our ally.
That the war will be over soon.
Yeah, this is a real reality check coming from Gulf allies saying, hey, we are not sure that we can hold on much longer, and they're turning to the U.S., who they see as sort of responsible and the instigator.
They're not turning, they've been with us the whole time. Come on, keep it real.
Crunch. The UAE has, said that they've been able to sort of weather the storm so far so well, though, among one of the economies most affected. They've not been able to sell oil to the broader world passing through the Strait of Hormuz, and we can see this start to spiral and escalate if other countries also start making similar asks. Really an indication that they don't see this war ending anytime soon.
The war is practically over. We decimated their entire military and took out the Ayatollah. The one who genocided 50,000 of their own people. That one.
Next year. What is this going to mean for, until the events of the weekend, we were expecting the U.S. president to, in a way, refocus to domestic political issues. What's the latest on that front then?
Yeah, this is, we know Trump would love to pivot and talk about domestic political issues, but the economic reality and the geopolitical reality is that Iran is continuing to dominate. We've heard the administration
They're not dominating
shit. Would go down quickly. Then we heard late last
week
control
the Strait.
Treasury Secretary that by September, and now we're hearing from Chris Wright.
You deluded yourself.
So this is really sort of, just in the matter of days or weeks, sort of the evolving thinking with inside the White House.
They're controlling Jack and shit, and Jack left town a long time ago.
That's a real red flag for Republicans heading into the midterms, where they want to be talking about affordability and the low price of gas. That was a big talking point for Trump before.
What is this, Monty Python?
Now it looks
it's
like
just
that
a flesh
will not be
wound.
something that they'll be able to tout, and potentially they could lose seats both in the House and Senate, giving Democrats back control of Congress.
Democrats are decimated.
Thank you so much, our Bloomberg politics editor Laura
They had nothing left.
Let's get some analysis now. Randa Slim is senior fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies, and she joins us now. Randa, always good to see you. So we had Laura just talking through some of the latest developments. What's your read on the situation and the extent in which this maybe moves the needle in some way and tells us more about what Iran has in terms of leverage?
Sherry on, call him out. Come on, Sherry on.
At this stage.
Call her out.
I mean, definitely the seizure of the seizure of the Iranian ship has complicated the situation that's already complicated, and already we are
It
hearing
hasn't
from the
complicated
IRGC,
anything.
the Iranian Revolutionary
It's
Guard,
just another
saying that they are
example.
going to respond to this latest escalation.
Sure isn't affecting the markets. I'm watching them right now. They're doing just fine.
How much can they continue with this war for both parties? I think we are hearing competing narratives now from both of them about the talks. The Americans are saying they're sending their delegation to Islamabad on Monday. Immediately after
All my
the
viewers,
the Iranian
you gotta take what they say with a grain of salt, because
news
this is
outlet
a Democrat-run
the
program,
Iranian
but
delegation
they
might
are
not
the
be going
best
to Islamabad.
when it comes to this information. I do acknowledge.
As your reporter said, we have a ceasefire clock that is running down fast, and the level of tolerance of both parties for continuing to wage this war is different. I think the U.S. maybe has a 2-3 week window. After that, whatever happening
2 or
is
3
all
window.
markets
We
going
can
to
take
affect
as long
and
as we
impact the
feel
US.
like.
Whereas I think Iran
We
thinks
could
that they
take
can sustain this war
our
for 2-3
damn
months.
time.
And Iran
They had
wants
no
to
cards. They got
consolidate
nada.
whatever victories they have
Hasta
achieved
la
in this war,
pasta. See you.
including
Wouldn't want to
control
be
over the Strait of Hormuz. And the U.S., especially the president, need to get a win before quitting, before
a win.
finalizing
We
this.
already
and
won.
The win is in the nuclear field.
Your leader
both
is
on
dead.
The enrichment side, as well on the
Give it up already.
Stockpile that Iran has.
How would you assess the prospects of another round of talks at this stage then? To your point about what Iranian media have indicated, that they are unlikely to come to the table as long as this blockade continues.
Look, I mean, there is an Iranian negotiation choreography, if we can put it this way, which has been their modus operandi.
Iran doesn't even have a leader.
You escalate on the ground, and then eventually you moderate at the table. And I think right now we are in this escalatory trajectory ahead of potential a negotiation track opening up, and both of them, I mean, the United States and Iran, are interested in these talks, are interested in these negotiations, but they need to engage in this kind of brinkmanship ahead of the negotiation, partly to
There's no brinksmanship.
Negotiation leverage. And
you have to
second,
actually have a position to have a
audiences.
brinksmanship.
After all, there are hardliners in Iran who are not interested in going to these negotiations, who think they are winning, and they need to just continue with this fight or continue with this blockade in order to
just like I said,
consolidate these victories.
Monty Python and the Holy Grail.
And
it's just a flesh wound.
Winning for Iran,
bro, you have no legs and no arms.
For another 2 to 3 months, as you said earlier, because that's a really long timeline when you think about all of the warnings that we're getting about global oil and byproduct supplies at the moment, with $4 a gallon in the U.S. when it comes to gas prices headed to the midterms. Can the United States or the Trump administration survive this?
That's where Iran thinks that they are winning.
Where do you think all the tankers are going? They're all coming to us for oil now.
Winning, but definitely the Iranian think that they can win. Their tolerance, their resilience for a 2-3 month continuation of this war is much higher than the tolerance and the resilience of the Trump administration. You already have an administration that's facing the majority of the U.S. public that is against this war and does not see the president.
You already have a Democrat Party who has deluded themselves.
And that's where the Iranians
reality is something that has escaped their minds a long time ago.
Leverage over the time window that the Trump administration can afford in order to basically, increase their or strengthen.
Y'all might want to focus on getting a new leader.
So, how long will the other
if y'all going to be talking all that smack,
the rest of the world stand still? Because right now, the calculation is that the U.S. energy landscape, that the U.S. economy is pretty resilient.
Might be time to fill the gap here.
Record highs just last week when it comes to the markets. That's not the case for the rest of the world. Asia is already contending with fuel shortages, and you're even hearing from the UAE on media reports that they want the currency swap line with the United States. So, how much longer can the rest of the world be okay standing still and waiting for the U.S., Israel, and Iran to work it out?
I think not long. I think the time window is not definitely 2 to 3 months. I think if the time window for the U.S. is 2 to 3 weeks, as far as oil markets are concerned, or I think
there is no time window for the United States. We can spend as much time as we want. We got 3 more years of Trump in office, baby.
Reserves dwindling or even disappearing fast.
Suck it up.
And then you are seeing we have heard what the UAE has requested recently. I think you are going to see other Gulf countries making the same request of the U.S., especially that they think that they tried or they advised the U.S. not to go into this war, and yet the American administration decided to go into this war, and they feel that the Americans have pushed them into this basically mess that they are right now living through.
Pushed them.
And so
we took out their entire leadership.
Soon, and I'm not talking about months. Especially
they got no card, they got nada, nothing.
As well as
hasta la pasta. See ya, wouldn't want to be ya. Bye-bye.
And the thing is, it also makes you think who wins out of all of this, right? Because the UAE apparently is now saying that they could turn towards using more of the yuan, for example. So will there be winners out of this that does not entail the U.S. just because this conflict keeps continuing to get dragged?
Look, I mean, China is definitely, sitting on the sidelines, watching carefully what's taking place.
Yeah, because China's our ally.
The kind of deleveraging.
They won't admit it, but they are. They're our number one trade partner. They helped us with the inflation, and they love Trump.
However, we have not seen yet China,
the government and their people,
to abandon its Middle East security strategy or how it has approached the Middle East. And also, we have to be frank. I mean, countries in the Gulf, although they are talking now about maybe not needing U.S. bases in the future, or maybe having to develop.
Since when are they talking about that?
To the U.S. security umbrella.
Iran just bombed all of them,
and there is no alternative right now. And so
they had no inclination whatsoever to side with Iran.
That the cost of this dependence is increasing incrementally.
Girl, what planet are you on?
Even as we talk about the here and now and how countries are weighing out the cost of the conflict, and perhaps this realliance is underway, talk to us about what is the one big change you see in terms of the power structures in the Middle East once we get out of this on the other side?
I think the one big change is going to be the Iran-GCC relationship going forward, and I don't think the Iran leaders realize now how
what leader
this is going to be to them.
What leader?
Especially in terms of the economics. I think the countries of the region have invested.
Come on, Sharian, call her out.
Rapprochement and de-escalation with Iran, and they were really shocked. They are now facing some kind of a strategic shock.
They're facing more than a strategic shock.
Of their civilian infrastructure.
All their civilians are for America.
Going forward, I think this relationship.
They all walk around the flag on the ground.
Been de-escalatory,
and Israel too.
They don't even. I think we cannot restore the status quo ante in this relationship.
Notice how they say Iran cast. They use personification because they don't have a leader.
Of basically approach to Iran. And partly is going to be doubling down on the U.S. because the trust or their their belief that this relationship could be restored with the relationship with Iran, I think right now is quite minimal.
Right. Brenda Slim, really great to get your insights. Thank you so much for that. Senior Fellow at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. This is Bloomberg. bringing you up to them in the news whenever and wherever it happens. I'm Sherian in Seoul, and this is Bloomberg.
Bring Ninanon.
Good morning, this is Bloomberg Surveillance.
Welcome back to the opening trade.
Watch Bloomberg Tech.
This is the Asia Trade.
This is Wall Street Week.
Welcome to Balance of Power.
You're watching Bloomberg Deals.
Welcome to Bloomberg This Weekend.
This is Bloomberg Television.
Yeah, it's Bloomberg. It should be Gloomberg, not Bloomberg, because they're all doom and gloom about Trump. Orange man bad. TDS is a real thing. We used to joke around about it. You know, now it's not even funny anymore.
The extra dimensions produces a potential energy landscape that mirrors the one responsible for giving mass to the W and Z bosons via the Higgs mechanism. The same torsion field generates a potential energy landscape that is identical in form to the one responsible for giving mass to the W and Z bosons, the carriers of the weak nuclear force, PIN.
Going back to the article here on the 7 dimensions.
Origin tied to the hidden dimensions themselves. The researchers emphasize that their approach does not pretend to solve quantum gravity outright. Semi-classical approximations break down near the Planck scale, where full quantum gravity effects dominate. As the black hole shrinks toward the
recent escalation in the conflict as it also is dragging the US dollar up along with it. US stock futures are sitting lower, and of course this was after a week where we saw a really strong rally. Traders gearing up for a bumpy open to the week after this latest escalation in the conflict. Let's get more with Garfield Reynolds, who leads our MLive Asia coverage.
Yes, Garfield!
We saw perhaps the
Garfield's the man.
To have some sort
He's
of
the most competent
last week. I mean,
of the entire Bloomberg
over the weekend,
analyst
how are
crew.
investors going to price this?
Go for it.
Well, I think investors are very much going to be looking nervously at today's open with oil jumping 7 or 8% or so, oil futures.
Things looking pretty good already.
And looking to see, does that increase fade away, which was what happened. If you remember the beginning of last week, we had a huge jump in oil prices when things looked pretty dark coming out of last weekend. And then by the end of the New York day, most of that had been erased because President Trump was sounding more conciliatory. The fact that the talks over the weekend had not led to a deal suddenly didn't seem so much of a concern, and equity traders in particular just went back to taking a look at what their base case was for where equities would go, assuming, fairly heroic assumption, assuming that peace will be reached and that the Strait of Hormuz will reopen, and therefore, given what had gone on so far with a range of sectors, especially tech, having dropped in price and no serious change in what investors' expectations are when it comes to earnings, that meant equities looked cheap, so pile into equities.
Treasuries never fully bought into the peace trade, though, did they? Because, I mean, yes, it did rally on the Friday session, but still 2-year yields are higher. Inflation concerns seem to be bigger at this point. How important will Tuesday's Senate confirmation hearing of Kevin Warsh be for the future of where yields go from here?
Well, in the short term, it might not have much impact if we get some large moves either up or down in the oil price. Over the longer term, it is going to matter because for bond investors, the concern is what is this war doing to inflation, and especially to inflation expectations, and then on top of that, how is the Fed going to interpret that? If we didn't have a situation where Jerome Powell's chairmanship of the Fed was due to expire soon, then we might well have already a slightly gloomier outlook for treasuries, because in the current environment, the Powell Fed is very clearly on hold until there's clarity on pretty much really until we get an actual resolution one way or the other on the Strait of Hormuz, on the overall outlook for the oil industry and for the oil price. So But with, that's not the case. We have Walsh heading for his confirmation hearings. Traders are going to be very interested to hear what he's saying about the likely dynamics for rates. And I think
but look, it's retraced about 50% from a peak.
That he will be quite keen to be easing policy toward the end of the year.
Warsh hearing starts Tuesday.
With that in mind, and along with potentially how markets refocus back on AI and corporate resilience, to your point earlier, what are you expecting to see in Asia for today and indeed this week?
Well, today I think Asia's going to do it pretty tough because there's not likely to be too much that's coming out, famous last words, that would indicate a shift back towards what we saw on Friday. So instead, we've got Asia, and remember, Asia is more immediately vulnerable to the closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and from Asia's point of view, a week has passed, and yet there's still no serious, if anything, the blockage has become more severe. So from Asia's point of view, that's we're going to see declines at the open. We saw
yes, they're so concerned that they're piling in the tech.
Friday, remember, at the time that Asia went home on Friday, the situation was
what they're saying in reality don't equal.
We've got now. We didn't have Iran at that stage announcing an opening. It's since closed, which actually makes the closure look more solid potentially. So I think Asian stocks are likely to sell off today. It's probably not going to be as deep a sell-off as we saw a week ago, because we do have that overall hope that the US and Iran, that they are negotiating through back channels, that they might lower the temperature a bit. So declines were probably modest from Asia. Then we're looking for, in the US day, what goes on there? How does President Trump react to the situation on the ground?
Garth, thank you so much. Always good to have you. Garth Reynolds, who leads Bloomberg's MLive Asia coverage. We have more hit on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
Beautiful, beautiful. Okay, back to the article on the 7 dimensions that the scientists have discovered on the universe. They theorize.
Planck scale, all existing models, ours included, must eventually confront the transition into the deep quantum gravity regime, PIN, AK acknowledged. What distinguishes our approach is that we do not claim semi-classical evaporation operates all the way down to the remnant mass, he added. At that point, a new physical effect takes over and stabilizes the configuration. The model makes testable predictions, such as the expected masses of hypothetical Kaluza-Klein particles associated with the extra dimensions, far beyond current accelerator reach, but potentially falsifiable in principle. The important point is that the predictions are concrete. The model can be wrong, which is what makes it scientific, Pincock said. While direct experimental confirmation lies well in the future, the idea builds on concepts familiar from string theory and M theory, where extra dimensions play a central role in unifying forces. It also ties into earlier work by Pincock's team exploring geometries and their implications for symmetry breaking and particle properties. For now, the proposal stands as a creative theoretical bridge between gravity, quantum mechanics, and particle physics. It invites fresh thinking about the hidden architecture of reality and whether the universe's deepest secrets might be woven into dimensions we have yet to perceive. Whether future observations of primordial black holes, gravitational waves, or high-energy particle collisions lend support remains to be seen. But the elegance of deriving both black hole stability and particle masses from the same geometric framework offers a compelling new lens on long-standing mysteries. Your support is crucial in helping us defeat mass censorship. Please consider donating via locals or check out our
Interesting.
Quick look at what we're seeing in currencies as well. Amid the return to some demand for havens, the Bloomberg dollar index is climbing a little. We are seeing the yen on the back foot, back at the 159 level now. And against this backdrop, of course, risk-related currencies such as the Aussie dollar are on the back foot in the early goings in Asia trade. We have more ahead on the program. This is Bloomberg.
All right. I'm going to listen to an article that apparently, I guess the Democrats are trying to stop Trump from upgrading the ballroom. Like, how is that important right now? So ridiculous. Go. If I can get it to start.
Appeals Court allows construction of White House ballroom to continue. By Tyler Durden. Sunday, April 19th, 2026, 6:15 p.m. A U.S. appeals court on April 17th put on hold a lower court order that had halted construction of the White House ballroom, allowing the project to proceed for now. Previously, U.S. District Judge Richard Leon issued a preliminary injunction blocking above-ground construction of the ballroom, but allowed below-ground construction of national security facilities to continue. Leon had said the project cannot continue without authorization from Congress. But now, as Al Fredley reports for the Epic Times, a three-judge panel of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia Circuit on April 17th
that should tell you exactly everything you need to know.
On whether the project should be halted. The Epic Times reached out to the National Trust for Historic Preservation, which filed the lawsuit last year, but did not receive a response by publication time. The White House first announced the project in July 2025, saying it would span 90,000 square feet. The construction phase began in September 2025, and the ballroom is expected to be
All right, pausing now, going back to Bloomberg.
We're tracking the latest developments in this re-escalation of the conflict in Iran, and essentially the Hormuz traffic being effectively grinding to a halt yet again. We are seeing oil prices reacting as are gas futures for Europe, and note there that volumes are pretty thin at this time. Let's bring in Stephen Stepchinsky, who leads our Asia energy coverage. Stephen, help us make sense of this, because we're still below 100 on Brent, right? What do you think is prompting this perhaps more measured reaction in oil markets to the developments on the weekend?
Well, first, like you said, this is still early Asia trading. We don't have a lot of the traders in from Europe and the US even, so maybe there's a bit more, there's less liquidity. So that might be playing partly way into it. But also, when you do look at the situation on the ground, I think when you look at total worst-case scenarios, there is still, I think, an expectation that there will be continued peace talks. I think when you look at a few weeks back when Trump was saying that he was going to attack the country and that he was going to essentially wipe them off the face of the earth, that was a much different situation. Now, yes, there are people boarding ships. Yes, there's the U.S. boarding ships. Yes, there's Hormuz still closed. That situation hasn't changed, but it doesn't seem like we've gotten to a position where there's an escalation of attacks between both sides. Now, that really depends on how Iran responds to this ship being taken. If they have a measured response, then perhaps we could see oil actually fall some more, as there's an expectation there could be talks later this week. Of course, will they or won't they on Tuesday is a big question in terms of discussions. But if this does spiral into a situation where perhaps Iran takes a step back and says, okay, we're going to start attacking infrastructure across the Middle East, which they had done weeks before the ceasefire, then we could potentially be in a situation where oil does go above 100 and does start to rise towards levels like that.
Yeah, I mean, given that this is really
I say that's unlikely.
Reality, right? Something that we thought was once
I got one word:
Valenzuela. The Strait of Hormuz can be closed like this. Does it make sense then that we have new ideas of new oil pipelines? The IEA's Fatih Birol, for example, talking about a corridor: Turkey, Iraq, and Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I think going forward, right, the cat is out of the bag, the toothpaste is out of the bottle. You can't put any of that back in, right? Whatever metaphor you want to choose, the fact of the matter is forever everyone's going to remember that Iran shut the Strait of Hormuz and that there was this widespread conflict that damaged facilities. It turned off the world's largest liquefied natural gas export facility in Qatar. It requires some countries to reduce output. This is
the world's largest in Qatar.
Require major rethink for the region and how to get the oil.
Are you listening to yourself, Steven?
Saudi Arabia, their bet on the East-West pipeline, which kind of pushed their oil away from the Persian Gulf towards the Red Sea, so it can go through the Bab el-Mandeb Strait to customers in Asia.
Look at his eyes.
That has turned out to be a big
how
win
fast
for
his
them.
blink rate is with his eyes.
Like Iraq.
He's talking out of his ass.
We'll also be looking at ways to getting the oil out of that region, and what the IEA does say it may make sense, right? There is a way to get it out. There have been these discussions. It has been challenging to kind of figure it out on an economic and cost point of view, but now with the situation with oil closer to $100, with there's so much
there is. It's called getting your boat sunk by the U.S. military.
Now, I also want to note that there are going to be a lot of discussions about alternative routes. But these are all long-term investments. This is not something that fixes a situation this year, maybe not even next year. Pipelines take a long time to build. You need investors. But maybe
exactly where are they going to get their oil from now?
The amount of oil that's coming out of the Persian Gulf,
United States of America,
could look quite different.
What about LNG? We've been seeing a rethink amid a
You see him
conflict,
take that
right?
big old gulp?
How do you see things
breathe, bro,
changing
breathe.
once we're out on the other side?
Right, so LNG,
see, if you had more testosterone,
the
you would
supplier,
be able to have a
shut
full
production.
breath.
Also, their supplies are trapped within the Strait of Hormuz.
That's what happens when you're low T.
5 ships, it looked like when they were heading towards Hormuz from inside the Persian Gulf to get out to Asian customers. They ultimately did a U-turn and stayed in there. So clearly, the situation is...
He's trying to act like he's all like,
and European customers,
calm demeanor.
What is the future
but just look at his eyes blinking so much.
This rock-solid reputation as the most
How
reliable
embarrassing.
supplier. And, of course,
I'm embarrassed for you, man.
of their own, they've had to declare force majeure because of the attacks on their facility. Will that mean that there will have to be premiums put into place, or sorry, rather discounts put into place for future Qatari supply? Will that mean that maybe LNG buyers look to other markets?
Yeah, other markets you need in the United States.
Have been started exporting LNG from their west coast to Asia. Does that become more attractive?
It's funny to watch them squirm like that.
Straits or bottlenecks from the Pacific to Asian customers. And then Russia. Russia has sanctioned LNG on the water.
I'd rather be poor and have my integrity than be rich and be
Will they
sitting
ask
there
for the U.S. for
like that?
waivers like they receive for Russian oil? Will that be an option going forward? So the calculus of the future of LNG, where Qatar was doing this massive expansion, they were the world's second largest LNG exporter. Will that continue? Will they still have that reputation
of course it's going to continue.
Supplier,
we control it now.
That is something that buyers will have to look at going forward.
And Stephen,
yeah, no shit.
Let's talk a little bit about jet fuel, because here in Japan we're headed towards a Golden Week, holidays, and of course it's summer.
So down in Texas we have a term for that. It's called bullshit.
Will we still be able to fly? Will there be enough supplies through the summer if this continues?
You know, I think every region looks a little bit different. It looks like Europe is one of the hardest hit. While there is supply available.
Okay, now you're talking, right?
There
Europe
has been
is.
warnings from Europe that perhaps in the near future it
you
could
know,
get a lot tighter.
if they had our back,
rise.
NATO should have had our back.
Increase in jet fuel
now
prices.
they're going to fuck around and find out
distinction between Brent oil, which we're seeing on the screen, and jet fuel, the products. While Brent has risen over the last this day and this morning, you are down from the highs seen in March. Jet fuel, on the other hand, has
risen for a while. It's retraced 50%.
Risen and increased in
prices. That's a 50% retracement on the Fibonacci scale.
Now, will we be able to fly out of Japan or other places for Golden Week? Certainly you will, but the cost of flying will increase. Also, there will be fewer flights potentially, especially in Europe. They've cut down the number of flights that they've had. There's also, of course, the Middle East, which with the tension continuing, a lot of flights there have been canceled. And if you're flying from Asia into Europe, you're going to have to go over airspace that is not part of this conflict, and that's making routes longer. That's causing a rethink as well as to schedules, which is resulting in delays and cancellations.
Steven Sapchinsky, who leads our Asia energy coverage there with the latest on everything to do with the energy markets. And these are some of the other headlines
He's leading
because Australia's energy minister says the country's fuel reserves rose in the past week and more is on the way. Chris Bowen says that Australia now has 46 days of petrol on hand, 8 more than last week. He says an additional 61 fuel-laden ships are on their way. The increase in reserves comes after a fire at one of the country's 2 refineries raised concerns about tightening supplies. Australia also signing a deal for the first 3 of the 11 advanced warships it plans to buy from Japan. Defense Minister Richard Marles and his Japanese counterpart Shinjiro Koizumi signed the agreement in Melbourne over the weekend. The upgraded Mogami-class frigates will be built in Japan at a cost of almost $11 billion, with the first delivery expected in 2029.
And the signing of the Mogami Memorandum, which we have just done now, will deepen defence industry cooperation between our 2 nations, specifically in the development of this critical capability for the Royal Australian Navy and also for Japan.
China's military is pushing further into the Western Pacific, deploying a naval task group for combat drills beyond the so-called First Island chain. There's a string of U.S. Pacific allies, including Japan, Taiwan, and the Philippines. China says the exercise is not aimed at any specific country. Beijing last week criticized the presence in the Taiwan Strait of a Japanese self-defense forces ship, calling it provocative. Take a look at how Asian markets are setting up. The open could be a little bit shakier, especially after the huge relief rally that we saw last week. On the Friday session, we saw the S&P 500 notch another record high. But of course, over the weekend, all of those mixed messages coming on the war in Iran continue to really hit investor sentiment. So we're seeing a bit of risk off in the Asian session.
They're not really hitting. They're barely budging the market. The gap just filled. I'm watching the charts right now.
A little bit of upside, but you can see crude prices right there, just jumping almost 8%. So that's going to be felt across different sectors. But returning to the whole defense.
We'll see how the market opens tomorrow morning.
We have seen.
I should hedge my bet on that a little bit.
Really,
I don't think it's a non-issue.
Defense stocks attracting renewed investor interest.
There's no panic.
Given this arms buildup sparked by the Iran war. Let's discuss all of this.
The market starts today, Sunday,
in Hong Kong. And
for the week.
I mean, we've had this conversation around defense stocks for a while now, not necessarily only because of the Iran war, which is in its 7th week, but also because we have the Ukraine war, because we had more focus on NATO, and just everybody trying to increase their defense budgets. Could this be a more long-term trade?
That's right, Sherry. What's really behind the recent rally in these Asian defense stocks?
Where's Nin? Get Nin on.
I
want to hear what she has to say.
Because of the tensions in Iran. Rather, investors are telling us that this is.
These are like my coworkers here. I watch them all the
expansion
time.
Of this theme, just highlighted by this Middle East situation, the indispensability of defense, and the reality is that the GDP for 5% of GDP. In NATO, NATO members are expected to hit that. The defense spending is to hit 5% of that GDP target by 2035, and the European outlays have already been increasing 10% annually since 2021 because of the Ukraine conflict. So all of these governments are actually switching from just a very generic protection defense to a very active deterrence, and that is creating this huge.
Iran bombed the shit out of them.
When we see that if there is this rise in budgets in Europe, that we would think that the Western giants are going to benefit. But the performances are showing that it is really not the case. All of these countries are actually turning to Asia to fill in that void. And the investors are telling us that even if there's a ceasefire tomorrow, and even if there is that end of the war immediately, it doesn't mean that the Middle Eastern countries will just scale back their plans to add defense budgets.
Sang-Yi, how is smart money adjusting to all this? Where is it moving to capture the growth beyond the major defense players in the region?
When we look at the global defense and aerospace gauge, we were able to see that the top five, among the top five performers of defense stocks, the three were located in Asia. These are LIG Defense, Hanwha Systems, the two Korean companies, but Astroscale is located in Japan. And so you can see that investors are not just looking at hardware tech here in terms of defense, but also some of the component makers that are deeply integrated in that supply chain. But when you look at India as well, it has been a laggard since mid-2025, but its defense index has rallied about 14% this year. And it's all because there is a structural change within the country that the government is pushing for local procurement. But even in the mature markets like Singapore, we have companies like ST Engineering that does aircraft maintenance. So all of these are pointing back to these Asian countries. And that's because there is that Asian advantage, the cost effectiveness, but also they produce NATO standard kits, and the timeline, the delivery timeline is just unmatchable by the Western companies. So Asia is slowly, from that buyer of defense systems for ages, now it's shifting back to its supplier mode, and that's what we're seeing in defense stocks.
Interesting shifts. Sang-Yi, thank you so much. Bloomberg Asia Equities reporter Sang-Yi Cha in Hong Kong for us. More ahead on the Asia trade. This is Bloomberg.
All right, back to the article on how they're trying to stop Trump from upgrading the ballroom, wasting everyone's time.
Before President Donald Trump's presidency ends in early 2029, according to the White House, the National Capital Planning Commission approved the ballroom project on April 2nd. In December 2025, the National Trust for Historic Preservation filed a lawsuit alleging that construction of the White House ballroom is unlawful and requested that the court halt the project. Leon ruled in favor of the National Trust for Historic Preservation.
Obama did the same thing.
Ordering that the ballroom construction project must stop until Congress authorizes its completion. The judge later clarified
but we already knew
in
that.
April 16th, ruling that below ground construction, including the construction of any top secret excavations, bunkers, bomb shelters, protective partitioning, military installations, and hospital and medical facilities, as well as such above ground construction strictly necessary to cover, secure, and protect such facilities, may proceed. Trump criticized the judge in a Truth Social post on April 17th, calling his ruling a mockery to the U.S. court system.
Yeah.
Everybody knew that it was planned
That's
and going to
accurate.
be built. This highly political judge and his illegal overreach is out of control.
But Trump has been right just about
costing our nation
everything.
greatly, he wrote.
Maybe
The
not
ballroom is
exactly
deeply
perfect,
important to
right?
our
But
national security, and no judge can be
in
allowed to stop
substance,
this
yeah.
historic and militarily imperative project. The project is expected to cost about $400 million, all of which is expected to be funded by private donors. According to a list provided by the White House to the Epoch Times, donors contributing funds to the new ballroom include Amazon, Apple, Google,
All right,
Caterpillar
we're back.
Incorporated,
Pause.
HP.
Futures after stocks fell in the Friday session.
We got 13 minutes
we had
left.
a bit more optimism from Wall Street last week, given the expectations that the Iran war and a ceasefire might be on solid grounds, but we saw that turn over the weekend, rhetoric just hardening, and not to mention, of course, the seizing of an Iranian chip. You can see weakening of the Japanese yen towards that 160 level against the US dollars. We see a little bit more strength in the greenback right now, a little bit of defensive posture going into the trading session today. And as the uncertainty around the war in Iran rounds up once more, Goldman Sachs also downgrading their forecast for Japan. Joining us now is Tomohiro Ota, senior Japan economist at Goldman Sachs. Always good to see you. So, are we talking about where are we going to see the spillover from the impact of the Iran war in the Japanese economy first?
Yeah, the main channel must be that the Middle East turmoil, and then which raise our inflation in Japan, and which lower the real wage in Japan, and then that lower the consumption growth. So that's the main reason why that we downgrade our focus.
Which is quite the difference from where we came last year when we thought real wages were finally starting to pick up.
Because inflation.
So how much of an impact are we talking about?
Yeah, so basically we only revised down our consumption focus marginally by mainly two reasons. One, the inflation would not accelerate massively because of the comprehensive price control measures by Japanese government. So that the fuel price is still contained in Japan, and that helps. And the second, another important thing is Japanese silver elderly household works as a shock absorber against the negative shock, and that's another reason why we didn't downgrade consumption much.
Elderly households are a large part of Japan's economy?
Yeah, actually in Japan, more than 50% of household is actually above 6 years old or above, and actually their consumption behavior is really different.
Yeah, Japan's average age is old. It's an aging economy.
Basically, in almost all younger generations, when the real income goes up, they increase their consumption, and vice versa. But for elderly households, even if their real income goes up, they never change their consumption. Even if the real income goes down, still they maintain the same consumption. Maybe partly because their consumption pattern is quite conservative, and basically they have already retired, so they do not get wage, so they don't care about.
They're stuck on fixed income
anymore, and they have
inflation hurts them.
So even if they don't have enough income from the pension, public pension, for example, they just withdraw money from the
That is so interesting that Japan has a stable buffer of elderly consumers. You mentioned how the government could really help out in sort of absorbing some of the shock from higher energy prices, inflation. But for how long, especially if we're talking about supply chain disruptions, not only here in Japan, but all across Asia in the region?
Yeah. So this is basically that Japan has continued this price control measure in the last 4 years. So basically they have a big, long history. So it's not very easy for Japanese government to stop the price control measure sometime very soon. And so far, they didn't show any of such kind of signal. But if the situation gets worse, and then the inflation rate or the fuel price shot up much higher, and then
it can't get any worse. I don't know how it get worse.
Contain those parts.
We already took out their
really
the military. They're
in a timely fashion.
Now it's just sad to watch them.
April in Singapore here.
It's sad to watch them. It's sad to watch the Democrats pander still.
There is a bit of a buffer.
Give it up, guys.
How do you think authorities are viewing the currency weakness? Because there seems to be less of an appetite to cap any of that at this stage. Is that your read of the situation? How do you think they're assessing the picture overall?
Yeah, so basically that, yes, we know dollar-yen is very at a weaker level, but basically it has been stable, somewhere around 150 to 160 rand in the last couple of years. So in that sense, actually, it is not a happy situation in terms of level, but basically it no longer generates a massive inflation in Japan. That's one of the reasons why that Prime Minister Takaichi was a bit kind of relaxed, has maintained a relaxed tone against the currency level at this level.
And what are your
between 1.5 and 1.6 is stability level.
Yeah, basically we have seen focusing from the more than several months that
see the trade I'm in here. That's AUD JPY. That's the Australian dollar to the Japanese yen. It's a great measure of the overall market's risk-on, risk-off
in
status.
9 to 12 months lag. So if the kind of say what is happening is a transitory inflation, BOJ better to wait. And then now, we can't even see what is going to happen next week. No, not a year ahead. So in such kind of the situation with a mounting uncertainty, the BOJ has a very good reason to postpone their policy decisions.
I think we have to be very careful with the infamous transitory line when it comes to inflation. But let me ask you, so if they don't move, say, in July, and then they postpone it,
that was based on
could
the
expect more weakness for the yen. But why is it that you say
mistake that
it has
Powell,
less of an
basically why
impact on
he's
inflation
getting out of office now?
Yeah, so basically it is still for the fuel price. basically we are roughly immune from any of those fuel price surge. But actually, the weak yen can affect the various different kind of goods prices. So because basically we import so many things, so those prices have no kind of price control measures. So if the dollar yen just depreciates massively, for example, and then that affects the inflation even bigger than what is happening. And then if so see, then the BOJ might worry that the second round effect, as we have seen,
which is highly unlikely.
In those cases, BOJ might accelerate the rate hike timing. That's why we haven't we didn't think that the possibility of June is zero. So if we see the sign of the second round effect, BOJ will do the rate hike earlier.
Just super quickly, is it more of a concern if you have higher yields and then you have all of these concerns around paying for all of the debt?
At this moment, we do not worry about that because, yes, interest rate is high, but the Japanese government paid interest rate is still 0.8% because we had the Japanese government had a huge backlog of the 10, 20 years bond, which they issued at 0% interest rate.
Tomohiro, always good to get your insights. Senior Japan economist.
They had a huge backlog on their treasury auction, so they're not even worried about it.
Every Monday,
that speaks for itself.
This is Bloomberg.
They're called JGBs. They're Japanese treasury bonds. Okay. We got like 4 minutes left. Back to the article.
HP Incorporation, Lockheed Martin, Meta Platforms, Microsoft, Palantir Technologies, and the Union Pacific Railroad. 148,325. More political stories on Zero Hedge.
All right.
I'm David Weston. Join me each week on Wall Street Week for stories of capitalism from business, markets, economics, tech, and climate. We go on the road.
David Weston
lies behind
is like one of the basically two guys on this entire program that are Republicans.
Is still important.
They said
and they're moderate
every
ones
citizen
too,
should be
at
investing
best.
in the market.
Accelerate progress.
But David Weston, I have to give him credit.
Watch Wall Street Week right here.
In the face
on
of
Bloomberg.
all that,
More
he
than what
still,
you need to know.
he still kept it
It's what you
real,
need
even
to
though
think
he
about.
was reserved.
Key investors, top executives, global innovators.
Understandably,
Join me for in-depth
you're surrounded by
conversations
Democrats,
with
you
the
got to be
biggest
reserved, but he
newsmakers
still
on
maintained
the
his
day's
integrity.
top
He didn't
stories.
pander.
Insight with
And so
Hassan
that,
Ahmed.
I have a lot of respect for David Weston. He's good. Conformity is a bitch.
The latest from the corporate front, Bloomberg's learned that the world's top energy trader Vitol Group has told banks it made first quarter profit of around $2 billion. Vitol has been trying to reassure banks following a Bloomberg report that it was reorganizing its derivatives team, which suffered losses from early war-related price swings. Sources say the figure could still change as the company finalizes its accounts for the period. Google is reportedly in talks with Marvell Technology to develop 2 new custom AI chips. According to the information, one of them is a memory processing unit, while the other would be specifically built for running AI models. The report says discussions are focused on chips designed exclusively for Google. Markets open in Sydney, Seoul, and Tokyo next. This is Bloomberg.
Interesting.
We've been scouring the frontiers of science and technology to help explain the difference between the next gold rush and whatever this thing is. And in season 2, we're upping the stakes. More danger.
Now that is some high-grade uranium mineralization.
We used to have a stable climate on this Earth. Right now, we do not.
More science.
We're pushing the envelope of technology in multiple directions. Software, hardware, chemistry, physics.
The cable is like very cold.
And more CEOs that can nail the photo shoot.
Hundreds and hundreds of billions of dollars are at stake.
While the problems are economic, the solutions are too.
And yes, we will be talking about AI.
There is a lot of humanoid hype out there.
But our future doesn't run on hype. It runs on innovation. Watch season 2 on all these lovely channels.
Every weekday, Bloomberg puts the spotlight on a different aspect of global finance. Flows, funds, and the forces shaping markets on ETF IQ. The future of money with Bloomberg Crypto. The players behind major transactions on Bloomberg Deals. The stories informing finance with Bloomberg Markets. And rates, risk, and the cost of capital on Bloomberg Real Yield. A different topic every weekday, now for a full hour only on Bloomberg Television.
Trading day is about to start.
And you're already looking for that edge.
The Open Trade brings you everything you need to know as markets open across Europe.
I'm Guy Johnson.
I'm Anna Edwards.
And I'm Tom McKenzie.
This is your opening trade.
Only on Bloomberg.
It's a multi-trillion-dollar industry. We'll show you what's happening in ETFs like no one else. ETF IQ, Mondays on Bloomberg.
All right, this is wrapping it up now.
This is
Good
the
job for
y'all
y'all hung in there.
Major market opens. A little bit of a fragile setup across Asia this morning. Of course, we're still digesting those mixed messages coming on the course of the war in Iran, April, and of course, we're seeing a little bit more upside on the U.S. dollar defensive posturing, especially after that relief rally that we already saw last week.
Yeah, on top of potentially geopolitics as a driver for markets, this week we also have a catalyst in the form of the Senate confirmation hearing, of course, for Kevin Walsh. Might that also be a driver for bond traders to some extent, Sherry?
Yeah, which was really interesting because Treasuries didn't necessarily buy into the relief rally, right? 2-year yield still higher since the war began 7 weeks ago. We'll see how all of that translates into the Asian session as well as we're watching JGBs and, of course, policy direction in this part of the world. We had heard from Bank of Japan Governor Ueda not really giving clear indications of where the BOJ rate trajectory is going, especially later this month when we do have that April 28th rate decision. So that led to pressure on the Japanese yen, which continues into the early Asia session with the yen getting closer to that 160 level against the US dollar. The Nikkei at the moment, slight gains early in the session at 0.4%. We had seen, of course, that loss in the Friday session last week. So we'll continue to watch some of those more sensitive sectors to the war in Iran, especially defensive, not to mention energy-related stocks. Also, keep an eye on the AI trade, of course. That's always the issue across Asian markets. As we are also seeing the Korean market coming online, we had seen a little bit of pressure in the previous session as well for the first time in 4 sessions. And the Korean won has been pretty range-bound because it's really all to do with the Iran war headlines and, of course, where global risk sentiment goes from here. And you can see a little bit of divergence with the Kospi gaining ground.
Global risk sentiment doesn't look bad at all.
Still weakening against
Just
the
saying,
US
folks.
dollar, headed back towards that 1,500 level, April.
Sherry, it's interesting how Asia indices are still managing to clock slight gains given the developments over the weekend on the Iran conflict, this escalation, and effectively the traffic in the Strait back to zero pretty much yet again. We are seeing oil prices reacting though, and you're surging roughly to the 97 handle now on Brent crude futures. That is dragging up along with it the US yields in a week where we are, of course, watching out for some of these developments out of the US as well. ASX, Australia stocks, we are pointing a bit lower, but overall, you do get the sense that there is a pretty measured reaction to the developments over the weekend, Sherry.
Yeah, this week, of course, across Asia, we're also contending with central bank decisions, the likes of Indonesia and the Philippines expected to hold rates steady, and a lot to do with really controlling the weakness in some of their currencies like the rupiah, not to mention trying to contain inflationary pressures. Let's see what all of this means for the markets. Joining us now is Carrie Craig, global market strategist at JP Morgan Asset Management. Carrie, great to have you with us. I mean, last week it was all about that potential peace rally. What does this mean for the rest of the week? Because I feel like holding sort of a Groundhog Day pattern where we seem to be getting somewhere by the end of the week, and then the weekend happens and we're not really getting anything the following week. And this is 7 weeks into this conflict.
I disagree with this groundhog analogy.
That certainly is the case.
You can't take out the Ayatollah twice.
To a certain degree, but I think
you can't take out their entire military.
Is they continue to see this
Go ahead.
at least pointing towards an off-ramp in the conflict in the Middle East. They're looking forward towards potentially some negotiations or a second round of negotiations happening. The potential, at least, flow of oil out of the Strait of Hormuz, if it's not fully opened. And I think they're looking through what could be, the end or at least the beginning of the end of this conflict, and focusing more on the micro fundamentals, given we're entering the earnings season in the US and the strength of the earnings going on. So that's, again, why we're seeing the markets continue to move towards all-time highs in some areas and thinking about the prospects for a global economy that continues to rumble on and not really fearing recessionary fears that may
because there's no real fear
when the oil price was much, much higher.
It's over.
Inflationary concerns still seem to continue. Of course, oil jumping.
They want to play the Monty Python card. It's really a flesh wound.
We've seen the 2-year yield at
Bro, give it up.
levels than before the war. How consequential would the Senate hearing by Kevin Warsh on Tuesday be in sort of markets assessing where potentially the Fed could go from here?
Yeah, I mean, Kevin Warsh has been pretty adamant about having lower interest rates in the US. He's been very vocal on the use of the balance sheet and changing the way the Fed has used the balance sheet in the past. So I think those are two clear things that will come out of the Senate hearing, questions around his views on the balance sheet and also on interest rates. I think the conflict in the Middle East has obviously given a bit of a movement in terms of how he may interpret the short-term view on interest rates, the fact that the market is pricing out those rate cuts and thinking about potential for even a rate hike there may give him pause the thought to see that they still want to see lower interest rates overall. And I think there's a bit of a still disconnect between the confirmation hearing and him actually becoming the chair of the Federal Reserve in terms of what that means for the outlook. Certainly other members of the FOMC have been a little bit more or less diverse.
When the confirmation comes, expect a bunch of dramatic Democrat politician responses, wasting everyone's time,
and also the implications for growth.
When is everyone going to get on board? I mean, like, it's so clear they're doing the right thing.
Transitory and growth that will weaken over the course of this year, and that will be much closer to their inflation goal by the end of this year, which would still allow them to ease policy rates.
Allow them. They have to ease policy rates. Otherwise, the interest on the debt is greater than the national budget now. They have to lower rates. They don't have a choice. Mathematically, just do the math. Get on your AI or whatever, Google it.
Dominant when we think about some of the bottlenecks we're having in the market,
even if they
demand for semiconductors, the demand for memory, the fact that we're moving from that shift in terms of all that.
If you want to verify what I'm saying, go to cbo.gov.
More based on
That's
the use
Congressional
of that, and that
Bipartisan
can be a lot
Budget
higher.
Office
So it's creating
website.
this demand,
Everything
supporting,
you need to
know, memory makers throughout Asia, semiconductor production throughout Korea and Taiwan. And I think it's a key focus for markets, and certainly still an area of the market that we like, and that also extends into thinking about some of the tech story coming from China. So those secular themes that are still there in the market do create attractive opportunities for investors, particularly given in the US case at least we've seen
especially Rio Tinto
hyperscaler names and valuations come down a long way. So
AI data centers,
perhaps more attractive entry opportunities. So I think there's still that bias towards thinking about quality in a portfolio. Some of those growth stocks do present that given their strength in their balance sheet. So there are still opportunities for having that risk on tilt, even with
that and all the stimulus slushing around from the big beautiful bill
at the moment.
What are we seeing in terms of the currency read-through, though? Because I think there are a bit of cross-currents. For the Korean won, for example, that today is among the currencies on the back foot. I think we're losing by the most since early March 5th, thereabouts. Does that represent a sort of headwind for investors when they view Korean assets overall?
We're wrapping this up now.
I think it's been a challenge when it comes to the
let him
currency
finish.
outlook. You've seen a big movement from Korean investors in towards the US, which has been one of the key reasons the currency has not done what you think it should do given the rates outlook and where the economy is heading. However, I think that there is still ample opportunity within Korea, a lot of demand from foreign investors.
South Korea is like the harbinger of the market.
US relative to emerging markets. Emerging markets do seem more favorable in this context. And again, being part of that key AI supply chain should be something that we focus on when it comes to Korea. Currencies, obviously, a contemplation for thinking about hedging or unhedged risk towards those markets. If we do think about the pressure that we've seen in the Korea won, obviously we want to think more about how much hedging exposure we want to take within that, and also the direction of the US dollar, which has been so key to this. So we do think about the prospects for that safe haven currency has been relatively tepid in this environment, but that flow through to demand for those strong AI names within the US, that hue of US exceptionalism coming back to a certain degree could continue to support the US dollar on that environment and potentially weigh
you need to reverse
on
that.
Korean currency as well.
It's not a degree, it's for certain.
Carrie, good to chat. We'll leave it there for today. Thank you so much for taking the time. Carrie Craig is Global Market Strategist at JP Morgan Asset Management.
Read my mind, you hear that? All right, y'all. That wraps things up today. Hope y'all learned something. And until next time, love, peace, and chicken grease. Mwah. Now, if I can just figure out how to turn. Here we go.